Grüezi Amerika, Views from the Sister Republic, a University of St. Gallen podcast by Claudia Brüwiler. Grüezi miteinander, and welcome to a very short bonus episode of Views from the Sister Republic. At the time that I'm recording this, it's still January 20th. It's Martin Luther King Jr. Day in the United States of America. Americans have a day off, and many of them, in fact, the majority of American voters, have a reason to celebrate. Today was the inauguration of Donald J. Trump as the 47th President of the United States. It was, in fact, the 60th inauguration celebration in American history. And normally, this would be a day that not only Americans who voted for the incoming president had a reason to celebrate, but actually all Americans would be reassured that even if they had not voted for this particular president, that he would still be there for all of them. That no matter the reasons why some Americans had not voted for him, well, so far in American history, it's always been a him. But that no matter what reasons they had to reject him, that he would still try to look out for all of them. That there was good reason to trust government, no matter its political colors, and no matter whether its mascot was a donkey or an elephant. So normally, an inauguration is also an occasion for reassurance and for the feeling that America's democratic experiment has been successful for nearly 250 years. This inauguration was a bit different. Not completely different from previous inaugural celebrations, but still different. Granted, its usual trappings were the same. The themes were also the same. Even many of the songs we heard were the same. For instance, religion still plays a big role, particularly in American democratic rights. And I'm using the word right here with intention, right, written as R-I-T-E, ritus, riten, because an inauguration celebration is, in some regards, a quasi-religious occasion. In political sociology, we use the term civil religion to describe the quasi-religious quality of an occasion such as the inauguration. For it is not only that you feel and see and hear the presence of God and the belief in God throughout the ceremony, but it is also the ceremony itself that is observed with the kind of solemnity and respect that usually is the attitude we have elsewhere, namely in church. And you might have noticed when you followed the invocation by Cardinal Dolan, who's also the Archbishop of New York and who usually holds Mass in St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City, that in his invocation, he was not only using religious themes, that he was not only leading people in prayer, but that he was actually also pointing to different occasions and moments in American history. For instance, he quoted from Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address, with charity for all and malice toward none. He was also reminding people of how George Washington, America's first president and general in the Revolutionary War, was seeking solace and guidance in prayer at Valley Forge when the prospects of American colonials and, well, militiamen, one has to say, wasn't really a proper army at that stage, and how he found solace and guidance in prayer. and how then the fate of American troops turned during the war. So this is rather unusual from our perspective. We rarely hear political events, political figures mentioned in a religious context, or hear them being given a religious connotation. And this is exactly what happens in the United States due to the strong civil religion, this strong Republican religion, you could say. You heard it in the invocation of Cardinal Dolan. You also heard it in the way Billy Graham's son led people through prayer, how Franklin Graham referenced the assassination attempt against Trump and gave Trump, in a way, a godly mission or a godly purpose in life in his prayer. So these are all examples of civil religion, and the place itself where the inauguration is held is also full of this kind of symbolism. So all of that is not very unusual. It's not something unexpected. We see that all 4 years. We also have the swearing-in ceremony with first the vice president taking the oath of office, followed by the president himself. And then would come the moment of reassurance, the moment of unification, where the new president would try to bring Americans together, would try to reinforce the bond that unites Americans, irrespective of their background, irrespective of their ideas and beliefs. And most presidents do that. If you go back to Joe Biden's inaugural address, you will find his entire speech peppered with this sense of unity, of this trying to bring people together. We even heard it then in the inaugural poem that was read, The Hill We Climb, that also highlighted this sense of common purpose, this sense of common ambition that brings Americans together. Did Donald J. Trump deliver that? Well, towards the end of his address, he did. This is the moment in his inaugural address where he indeed did also hit common themes, where he highlighted Americans' manifest destiny, highlighted its exceptional status in the world, where he underlined how many Americans had contributed to the success of the nation and how they were all united by their belief in America's uniqueness. But the remainder of the speech was quite different from what we're used to at inaugurations. Donald J. Trump's second inaugural address was in many ways an echo of his first one, although an echo is usually fainter in sound. We can't make out the entire message as it was originally delivered. And let's say the second inaugural address of Donald J. Trump was anything but faint, and it was anything but unclear in its message. It was a bold and a, yes, very partisan speech. And in being a partisan speech, it was anything but a traditional inaugural address that serves to reassure Americans and the world of the intentions of the American president. In fact, this time around, it was also a speech that probably unsettled many international observers and a little country in Central America. But let's stay with Americans as the main addressees of Donald Trump's second inaugural address. 4 years ago, he promised his inauguration to be, quote, the day the people became the rulers of this nation again. He promised to end this American carnage. This year, he practically said the same thing, albeit with different words. He declared his inauguration to be a, quote, liberation day, and he wants to end America's decline. Not a carnage, just a decline. And he also saw himself to serve a particular purpose and to have been elected for this particular purpose. A theme that resonates particularly with his evangelical voters and that basically echoes the prayer by Franklin Graham delivered before the swearing in. Donald J. Trump declared that he was, quote, saved to make America great again. Saved when there were 2 attempts on his life. Now, that's not very divisive, nor is it partisan. It might not be a sentiment shared by everyone. But what was partisan was how Donald J. Trump singled out his voters to thank them, to praise them. He thanked African American voters and Latinos for having embraced his candidacy. And when he started to list the executive orders that he was intent on signing, he listed orders that would be very controversial and that were touching issue areas that are divisive. Granted, many of the promises, well, are just that. They are promises he made to his voters. And thus, many Americans will applaud the executive orders that he promised in signing. Others, however, will see this as a threat. And listing all of these executive orders in an inauguration is rather unusual, given that he has to expect people to react negatively. Well, those people who did not vote for him, that is. What are we talking about? We're talking about measures against unauthorized migration. We're talking about gender identity. We're talking about, yes, America's culture wars. And America's culture wars are, as goes the word, very divisive and thus not really what you want to touch on during an inaugural address. And normally when presidents address international affairs, they try to embrace and praise America's allies, stress the values that America seeks to spread in the world, that America seeks to support in the world, and stress the importance of a peaceful world order with a strong America in its midst. Donald J. Trump chose another route by declaring America to be a growing nation, and not just an economically growing nation, not just a militarily growing nation, but a nation that also wants to grow its territory. Donald J. Trump said in his speech that he wants to be remembered as a, quote, peacemaker and a unifier. While his supporters will find a lot to celebrate in this inaugural address and after this inauguration, others will have become more concerned, having heard him out. And whether you support Donald Trump or oppose Donald Trump, one thing I think we can all agree on, this was a rather unusual inaugural address. Unusual in its being very partisan and touching extremely divisive issues. And it's not the kind of speech that makes you being remembered as a unifier. These are very briefly and off the cuff my thoughts on America's 47th president's inaugural address. Usually I close episodes of Views from the Sister Republics with a recommendation of what you could read, watch, or listen to next. And I actually have 2 recommendations after today's speech. One is a book by Daniel Immerwahr, or Daniel Immerwahr. Immerwahr, a beautiful name in the context of the new presidency. He wrote a book called How to Hide an Empire, which touches on America's territorial acquisitions outside of the 50 states that we usually limit America to. And I think, given that we have heard that America wants to be a, quote, growing nation, also in territorial terms, I think this book might be more rewarding to read than ever. And a second reading recommendation is one that I will quote from, and that is my favorite inaugural address ever, Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address that he held on Saturday, March 4th in 1865. And yes, since we got very little poetry on today's inauguration celebration, I allow myself, I take the liberty of quoting the last paragraph of Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. With malice toward none, with charity for all. And with that, auf Wiedersehen.
Grüezi Amerika. Views from the Sister Republic, a University of St. Gallen podcast by Claudia Brüwiler.